Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's video, we're talking about how generative AI can assist in the process of cloud migration. Certainly one of the clear challenges here is that cloud migration requires a lot of human insight. So how exactly can generative AI play a role in something as challenging and complex as cloud migration? To discuss that, I'm joined by a major industry expert. With me is Vikas Ganoorkar, Global Cloud Migration Leader for IBM Consulting. Vikas, very good to have you with us today.
Thank you, James. Pleasure to be here.
So cloud migration, I mean, obviously this is not a new topic. We've been migrating to the cloud for a good 15 years now, but what about the challenges of cloud migration here in 2024? What's a core challenge that turns up again and again?
So James, I'll answer it in a way that, the core challenges, if you may, the parameters are not very different from what it was earlier, right? And I tend to think about it in broadly 5 dimensions, right?
Okay.
We typically work with clients.
Sure.
So there's a business dimension, right? A lot of times, do we have the right strategy in place, right? Do organizations have the right strategy of, what they want to do with their cloud transformation? Migration is one of those sort of aspects. They have the right sponsorship, right? Are they clear about the value that they're expecting to get out of it? And obviously correspondingly then there is the benefit angle to it, right? What is the business benefit that you're looking for? So that's the business dimension, as I call it. There is a technology dimension, right, which is really this whole debate discussion about, is hybrid multi-cloud the right option? What are the components of hybrid multi-cloud, right? Should you remain on-prem? Should you move from your on-prem to a colo facility, right? There's migration which is on-prem to on-prem, right? There could be migration which is really, which cloud do you go to, right? Private, public, and so on, right? So
can I interrupt you there for just a little bit? I give that one question about hybrid and multi-cloud. It seems like that's so much the default model. I guess 2 questions, right? It's so much the default model as someone who would not opt for multi-cloud. And there's someone who's still on-prem who's thinking maybe it's not a good idea. That's the one I would be curious about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what the dimensions are not changing, James, right? But underneath each of those dimensions, the way clients are starting to look at things is slightly different. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right, on this just technology dimension, right, and the hybrid multi-cloud thing. There are conversations that I'm sure you've heard, right, clients have had where everyone went with the cloud first approach, right, and said, let me go to cloud first, right, without looking at the cost dynamics, right, and now, I've migrated to the cloud, my workloads to the cloud, but it's expensive for me to run on the cloud than it was actually on-prem, right? So there's this whole discussion on repatriation, right, is another topic that is coming up. So that's one example which we're dealing with more and more. The other thing that is happening is, I'll give another example of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, for example, right? There are more aggressive, newer, players that are entering into this space because of their own incumbency. Oracle is a great example, right? They have their own incumbency of ERPs that work well with OCI, databases that work better on OCI, and so on.
Sure. Right.
And that's again another dimension, right? We are having sort of this whole discussion about, should we move some of the workloads from wherever they are to OCI, right? And that's just one of the examples that I wanted to sort of give you. The third dimension also has been an ongoing discussion a lot of times, right? Should I migrate first? Should I modernize first? Right? So that also keeps changing from client to client, right? And the scenario is different, right? Or should I build and just retire everything, right? The decommissioning aspect is also important. So, I mean, those are all, I'm clubbing it under the technology dimension, right? Then there's this whole operational dimension, which is more about operational readiness, right? What do you do post migration? Okay. How do you make sure that, are you ready for, is your sort of, operational team ready to manage a hybrid multi-cloud sort of environment? I'll give another very interesting nuance that is becoming very popular these days is with what's happened with Broadcom and VMware, right? There are lots of options, right? Clients are saying, oh, can I go to Nutanix, right? Can I go open source? Great conversations from a technology perspective, right? You need to start thinking of the operational dimension also, right? Do you have, readiness, right? Is this scalable in an enterprise manner? I mean, whatever options, right? I'm not sort of saying one versus the other. That's the technical part, right? So that's how I club, the operational dimension. Then there is a cost dimension, right? which standard is always there, right? I mean, are you able to sort of give something to me in the most cost effective manner? I think there is this whole debate of modernization comes at a price, right? I mean, short term, long term, probably it's more beneficial, right? Migration comes at a lower cost, but then is there value? So all of those things is really the cost dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the final thing is the talent, right? Do you have the right skills? Is the partner that you're working with has the right skills and capabilities across whatever your target state needs to look like, right? So I know I answered it not in one dimension, but it's across 5 dimensions that I see typically. And the answer, there's no one size fits all, right? It varies from client to client on where they are, what their sort of strategy and priorities are, and then sort of the challenges become sort of different.
Well, all right. So you really laid out a lot of the complexities involved, and those are some of the big questions that companies face. Then the sort of a new question is, how can generative AI tools enable a more efficient cloud migration process? And I guess what I'm most curious about is generative AI more of a peripheral helper at this point, or is it playing a major, almost manager role? Like, how does it help, and what sort of a role does it do?
So as the technology is becoming better and better, and as I think we are getting more used to understanding the technology nuances and benefits, I'll almost say across all of these 5 dimensions that I mentioned, right, the applicability is sort of unique in a way. But at the core of it, James, how I see this is that generative AI tooling, right, is going to create a view of how migrations can become faster, cheaper, right, more efficient from a quality perspective, right? And I also often give an example of it's migration is like moving houses. I mean, just personally, I 2 years back, I lived 10 years in Singapore. I moved to US recently, and in that whole process, if you just take that view of migrating from Singapore to sort of US, it involved a lot of other dimensions.
It's a big migration, it sounds like.
Exactly, it's a big migration, but then it was also about the time involved to migrate, right? I mean, I moved during COVID times, and I assumed 2 weeks of sort of shift, right? With my packers and movers, it took 4 months, right?
Wow.
And I also often use that analogy to sort of say we have to sort of be clear about the time dimension that it takes, right? Generative AI helps us ensure that the time dimension is more well defined. It is faster to a large extent, and we can go into more details about what we in consulting are doing around that, right? It becomes more manageable in terms of the cost, right? I spoke about the talent dimension, and I have a very interesting take on what generative AI does, James. Is I think it's bringing a lot closer the skill variances, right, that a junior person with less experience would have than what a senior person with more experience would have. Because with a lot of and in consulting, we have kind of shifted very rapidly to this whole business of migration with Gen AI assets and assistants, right? And the idea is that across the life cycle of migration, if it's design, assess, migrate, test, manage, right? We have squads, and each of those squads are now embedded with digital assistants, right? Which will actually be a set of tools that are Gen AI powered, which will enable them to take decisions better and faster, right? And in that regard, what we end up being able to do is that my skill variance is managed much better, right? So the junior person now is not necessarily having to always rely on the more senior architect or expert to be available face to face and spending a lot of time, because that digital assistant will do a lot of that work, right, for that junior person. The senior person is now not spending that much time with the junior person, right, to handhold the individual, but spending more time on target state architecture, right? What are some of the challenges that can actually be addressed, right? So they free up a lot of their time in kind of doing a relatively more impactful work to the client, and that sort of gives more value. So it's across all of those things that we are able to do it. Then the final thing that I will say is, how do we bundle all of this together, right, is really we've brought in this concept of a migration factory. Okay, again, the factory word is not new, right? It's been there for a long time. But
Right.
the migration factory, how it helps is a lot of what I said: speed, efficiency, right? The skill dimension. How do you scale it, right, from one client to the other, right? And then make sure that in the process of doing so, our internal value that we have already got on this, right? Time taken to respond to a client from, a client coming and saying, I have 50,000 VMs, right, that I need to get
Right.
migrated, right?
Yep.
Earlier, I would take maybe 4 weeks, right, to get a proposal out to the client, right? Because there are complexities of estimation, complexity determination, right? What are the right resources and skills we need? I am now using generative AI to get all of that done. So that 4 week period has probably shrunk to now about 4 to 5 days that I can actually kind of So think about it from that angle also, right? My turnaround time to actually support more bids, right? And this is very internal for us, right? Has improved dramatically, right? And then the factory construct is really how the client experiences it outside in is they see repeatable patterns, right? Repeatable sort of journeys, as we call them within IBM. So take rehost as a journey, right? Take replatform as a set of journeys, whether it could be databases, middleware, whatever, right? Take containerization as a set of journeys, right? So I have now, based on experiences that we have had with multiple engagements that we've done over the years, we have we have harvested all those patterns and made sure that those patterns are now codified in a tool or platform that we use, which our teams use internally, right? But then when we go to deliver to the client with the factory approach, I'm able to actually do this in a more repeatable, scalable manner. How the client experiences it is we call it as a starter kit, right? So I'm bringing those starter kits to the client every time I need a migration done. And typically anywhere from 75 to 85% of those patterns are reusable, because we have seen it with almost every client, right? So take the source to to target of a database, right? Or a middleware, right? It's all the target is more often than not an AWS, Azure, or Oracle, sort of Google or IBM Cloud. So all that is very well defined already. Okay, subtle nuances that a client may have is what the 15% or so will be required. But when the client experience that I'm coming up with this ready set of starter kits, right, you are able to sort of then get into the nitty gritty of execution much better and faster than what you used to do without generative AI tools. So that's the way we have been able to implement it.
All right, so you're talking about IBM Consulting Cloud Migration and Modernization Factory. To be clear on that, is that really a consulting arm, or is it consulting and IBM is also doing the actual work?
We're doing the work also, right? So
Yes.
that's again exactly. I mean, I think the whole conversation I refer to the .com VMware thing again, right? I'll bring it, or I'll give you another example where we are doing this in multiple cases. A data center exits that clients are looking at, right? Again, for both those reasons, right? Time is of essence, right? And cost is of essence, right? The .com VMware clients who've decided that they want to either move within the VMware footprint to VCF, for example, right? Or they want to move out of VMware to native EC2, for example, on AWS, right?
Sure.
Both those things are predicated primarily around the price impact that they're seeing, right? And hence, now the move cost, right, the migration cost is also another added dimension, right? And that, along with time, is the other factor. So this is not just about consulting, it's also about actually execution. And in fact, the factory is more about the execution than the consulting, right? I can do both, right?
Okay.
But the whole idea is, in the journey, I help consult and provide the target state, right? And then I also show you my set of Gen AI tools and assets that I have, which will help make execution faster, cheaper, and more efficient.
Can you talk a little bit about the VMware Broadcom migration situation? I know where it's a little off topic, but you may be playing a role in that. Is there advice you'd give them in terms of the migration, or it's too off topic for you on this? No,
it's a very hot topic, actually.
It is indeed, yes.
Yeah, and every client is talking about it. They're considering it. And look, I think from a consulting perspective, our position is that we go and meet the client where they are, right? And in that context, I can spend hours talking about it, right? Because
sure, I'm sure
so many
it's a big
conversations.
topic.
But in
Absolutely, yeah.
summary, I would say that the way most clients are seeing it is it's a determination again of whether you are hybrid multi-cloud and what is your hybrid multi-cloud composition, right? Many clients we are talking to want to modernize within VMware, right? And obviously our IBM Cloud partnership is great in that example, right? We are big partners with VMware and .com on that. If you look at what Azure is talking about, what Google is talking about, what OCI is talking about, is really taking the VMs, move them to the VMware service and cloud, right? So that's kind of one pattern. On AWS, it's more native EC2, right? So that's the cloud dimension. Then you have a lot of clients who still want to remain on-prem, right?
Sure.
They're not ready to sort of move to cloud. And there we are having this whole conversation of what do we do with them, on the on-prem state. Okay, the common thread across all of this, James, are two. One is from our migration factory, we can help them achieve both those options. But the most important value that consulting brings in, or more than consulting, it is the bigger IBM family that brings in, is we have Red Hat now, right? So when you talk about modernization, right, when you talk about our container first approach here really is with Red Hat, for example, right?
Right.
With Red Hat OpenShift, and what Red Hat OpenShift has to offer across, whether you're on-prem, whether you're cloud, right? I mean, I could kind of help make that a lot more seamless. And in that regard, we believe, right, that IBM is very uniquely positioned to address the client sort of problem statement in this area, because across the stack of products that VMware has, we have an answer or alternative that we can actually provide with ourselves, right? As I said, Red Hat is one option. Even on the FinOps space, for example, right? We have Apptio, Turbonomics, and all of that, right? So a lot of those are really complementary alternatives that we are able to provide to clients, and that's what is making these discussions very powerful, rich, and effective as well.
Great. Well, I think really the question is the future. So many companies want to know where we're going. So how do they prepare for that? So what is your sense? I mean, how do you foresee the cloud migration landscape evolving over the next few years, especially due to generative AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, James, right? The way I see it is everything is going to become AI defined.
Sure. I mean, I think there's nothing that won't be.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. So we have been having conversations with clients about AI defined data centers, right? With what NVIDIA and AMD and this. So you have to start looking at how do you do infrastructure modernization, right? With generative AI is really going into this GPU kind of construct, right? Then obviously as you go up the stack, right, it's about how generative AI is able to make migrations and modernizations more effective, right? And I think it kind of starts going into individual piecemeals of scope line items and phases, right? Helping make decisions better, right? Helping make the decision of what should be a lift and shift, what should be a replatform, what should be so the 6 hours that Gartner talks about, right? How do you sort of bring that all about in a more meaningful manner, not just because of the unidimensional view of what that particular client has, but what our experience has been. Now suddenly with generative AI, I'm able to sort of give the client that view a lot better, right? That we have done this with 500 clients, for example, right? And this is what the pattern that we've seen. So that's one. I think clubbing it across, there is a day two work, right? There's a managed piece. I'll give you an example that with generative AI, a lot of clients that we used to talk about where they want us to do migrate and manage for me, right? Take the workloads, right? Migrate and manage it for me.
They want you to just really handle it.
Exactly, right? And in that regard, in the past, what we used to really do is, go with migrate first, right? And then once we are ready, when we get into sort of, day two, our managed team will come in and sort of, start looking at transition and so on and so forth, right? We are bringing all of that together with generative AI, because a lot of the discovery data that we do during migration is what is very useful for our, AMS teams also to sort of start looking at it and sort of, making decisions on what kind of tickets are going to sort of come up, what kind of support issues could come up, right? So the value that the client gets is much more better, because now they're experiencing a more seamless integrated team that is coming and providing that end-to-end experience. And that's sort of one aspect. So I spoke about generative AI in the broader context, right, of the phases and all of that. Your question really was about what is the future of migration, right? And
Sure.
in my opinion, I think we touched upon some of these things in the hybrid multi-cloud space. Cloud to cloud migration is a pattern that we are starting to see, right? We will sort of need to start looking at how do we help clients move from one cloud to the other for various variety of reasons, right? There is this whole element of the replatform refactor space, which actually becomes much more efficient now with code generation and code automation and all of those things, right?
Just to be clear, what do you mean by replatform? I'm not sure everyone knows that term.
So basically, upgrading sort of your application or software version, right? So that's kind of I very simply categorize as replatforming, right? If you're looking at a older version of Java to a newer version of Java, right? I mean, so those kind of examples, right? Now with generative AI, I mean, if you look at Amazon Q, for example, right, it's something that is much more efficient, right? You're really requiring very little labor, right, or expertise to be able to do it, and the developer who's actually aided with a digital assistant like that is able to do it much more faster and with a reduced need for testing also, right, and so on and so forth. So those are the kind of things that we are seeing become a lot more efficient and effective, right, than what we were able to do in the past. And with all of this, I think the notion of quality assurance and also cost control, right, are becoming much more predictable, right? I'll finally sort of put in this plug-in of saying, from a consulting perspective, all of this is also leaning more heavily towards commercially. I now have a much better ability to go and commit to outcomes to clients, right? In the past, we used to sort of, struggle with that a little bit, right? Because of, I don't have clarity.
You mean the financial outcome, or what do you mean in terms of
financial outcomes, even business outcomes, right?
Okay.
Is a lot more easier to sort of, commit to. And that's also kind of, giving us a lot of edge, because clients are wanting to sort of, see that, right? That, I'm going to link, a lot of work that we do with business outcomes that, you will get, right? And that's where the value is.
Vikas, I think you said it. It's a lot of good stuff. I certainly learned a lot. I greatly appreciate you sharing your expertise today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. This has been a pleasure.